All right, so let's get started. If you don't know me, I'm James Edward Gray II. I used to think I'd been in the Ruby community a long time. I was one of the longest of people I knew, and suddenly I'm hanging around with a whole bunch of people that have been in the community way longer than me. So I guess just a moderately long time. This is my 5th Lone Star, although I didn't actually attend in person last year. I sent a video because I was busy having my baby back in Oklahoma. So Lone Star is on the exact same week this year. So I postponed my baby's first birthday to be here. Yeah. There's nobody that loves Ruby more than me, okay? And this is my first keynote address, so kind of neat. I had no idea what a keynote was. Jim asked me like 2 years ago if I would give a keynote at Lone Star, and I just did my usual thing and said yes before I even thought about it. And then it occurred to me, I don't even know what a keynote is. So I got myself into that mess. But I got a year's reprieve because of the baby, right? And then now here I am. So I used Keynote to make my slides. I mean, does that count, or is it more than that? I don't know. I like to have an icebreaker joke, so I thought I would get up here and say, what's the difference between a keynote and a normal speech? And then I would say 15 minutes and use that as my icebreaker joke, because I figured they'd give me extra time, right? But if you look at the Lone Star site, I don't get any extra time. Let's see, 45 minutes for me. Glenn's up next. He's got 45 minutes. Then Ben and Avdi, they get 45 minutes. So as near as I can tell, everybody gets a keynote at Lone Star this year. That's right. In fact, if you look at this, it looks like the main difference between a normal speech and a keynote is the color red, right? Or maybe we should do that as the color red, yeah? Okay, that seems to be the difference. But in my search, I eventually found this. The keynote address is delivered to set the underlying tone and summarize the core message or most important revelation of the event. Do you guys realize what this means? Whatever I say is right. That's amazing. How come nobody told me about this before? I only want to give keynotes now. And by the way, anybody who disagrees with me is off topic. Right? Okay, so I really did look at good keynotes, things I like, and wanted to do in my own. I always enjoyed Matt speaking. I know it's kind of hard because the language barrier, but he always has those great stories. My dad used to send me to school with a knife to sharpen pencils, and that's why Ruby's dangerous, Don't laugh at that. That's Matt's joke. This is my keynote. Don't laugh at that. So in studying the great keynotes, lots of people talk about their lives and relate it to what we do as Rubyists. The middle one's going to be the one that's really hard on me. If you've ever seen my speeches before, I just love to throw code in there and talk about it, because that's the only thing I know how to do is program. So that's tough on me. But, this is supposed to be kind of forward-looking and inspirational, hopefully not in a London riot sort of way, but inspirational. So I'm just going to try and tell you stories and see if we can draw any deeper meanings from that. So to get started, let's just talk about what's on my mind, okay? You guys knew that, right? I'm a guy. Yeah. Everybody thinks this keynote's about to take a serious turn for the worse. Let me see if I can save it. Does anybody know what this person is doing? Just shout it out if you know. Any guesses? What was that? She wants to stop breastfeeding is what he said. So, what? Not eating, right? Not eating, apparently. So a couple months back, my wife and I are in the car driving home. It's kind of late. That means 11:30. I have kids now, so that's kind of late. And I'm just kind of drifting in the car and thinking, and I think my wife's going to stop breastfeeding soon. Maybe I should go to the grocery store and get some cabbage. Yeah, you're never going to ask me what's on my mind again, right? But the reason I thought that is when she was pregnant, we did all those classes, the breastfeeding class. And they said, when you're ready to stop breastfeeding, get cabbage leaves and put them on your breast, and it'll dry up your milk supply. That's what they said. So I'm in the car, we're driving home, I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, all right, how does that work exactly? I mean, seriously, what's the mechanism behind it, right? Are we saying that cabbage have some chemical in them that once you're exposed to that, it dries you up? But if that's true, wouldn't you just eat it, Seems like you get a bigger exposure, right, than what's absorbed through your skin. And if it's not that, then were we saying there's some kind of cabbage field or something that, radiates something? I guess it's the way onions make you cry or something. I don't know. Seems like we would see newspaper articles about people going into the grocery store and accidentally drying up their milk supply, And we don't see that, so that doesn't seem very likely. And I go with the newspaper article thing because where I live in Oklahoma, we do see newspaper articles about people who get on roller coasters when there's tornadoes dropping out of the sky. So, I'm sure it's equally entertaining, right? So finally I gave up and I'm like, that's it, I'm Googling it, right? And I started to run into arguments like this. I know it sounds weird, but you can put cabbage leaves on your breast and it will dry your milk out. I did it and it works. So I did it and it works. Then did she go back to her husband and say, honey, for the sake of experiment, we need to get pregnant again so I can go through this process, have another baby, and try it without cabbage leaves? How about this one? Cold cabbage compresses will reduce swelling quickly if left in place for long periods, will help diminish milk supply. This may be used instead of or in addition to removing small amounts of milk to reduce supply. Use fresh green leaves, cleaned and chilled, wrapped around the breast. Change them about every 2 hours. Holy cow. Kind of a lot going on there, don't you think? Okay, so I was a little suspicious when I began to see these arguments. And then I thought back, so why is it I even believe this in the first place, right? Well, it's because some crazy lady at a breastfeeding class told me this, right? And having now had a kid and gone through the first year of life and delivering all that, I can tell you pretty surely that about 9 out of 10 things that lady told me is total crap, okay? So it's not true. So she doesn't turn out to be the best source of information. And it turns out if you keep looking, you can actually find the real answer about whether or not cabbage leaves will diminish a milk supply. Raise your hand if you think cabbage leaves diminish a woman's milk supply. Whoa, we've got a couple. 3. Yeah, you're wrong. Yeah. Dead wrong. Sorry. It turns out that the cool element, if you do have them cold, that reduces engorgement, which is a discomfort women experience when they're trying to diminish their milk supply. But that's it. And any cold compress or anything like that does the exact same thing, cream stuff. So it's not really cabbage. They were probably just used traditionally because the ease of applying them, right? So that's why. So I brought this all up at a Ruby conference so that we could kind of talk about the process, right? It's, I ran into this question. I did some thinking to try and figure out how this all works and, eventually went in search of evidence. And this process actually has a name. It's called skepticism, right? It's, and I don't know if you know this or not. I didn't know this until recently, but skeptics have their own community. And it's much like this. We hang out just like we do here and, have beers and talk about things. We say different things like, things like that. But, other than that, it's pretty much the same, right? So what is a skeptic? A skeptic is a kind of person who wants information for the things they believe, right? Wants facts to back it up, right? So We tend to be kind of doubtful of things until we've seen the evidence and then convinced ourselves that that's the way something is. And we have special interests. We like to study lots of things, right? So our brain, for being this biological wonder, there's certain circumstances where it really kind of falls down a well, right? And if you know what those circumstances are, then you're more apt to understand how humans go wrong, kind of. And we like to study conspiracy theories and other myths because it's interesting to see how they form and what keeps them going. Plus, it's just entertaining, right? And then logical fallacies. Those are the bad arguments I was showing you earlier, right? There's certain ways that when you make an argument, it can't be correct, right? And if you can learn to spot those, then you can find problems as they come up. So I mentioned brain malfunctions. Here's one. There's a ton. Pareidolia, idiomotor effect. But what about hypnagogia? Raise your hand if you think you know what hypnagogia is.
I not only know, I have it for years.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we have somebody that has hypnagogia, which means everything I say he'll probably be up here correcting, but that's okay. I'll do my best. I don't have hypnagogia, okay? Actually, all of you know what hypnagogia is. You're probably more used to seeing it like this, though. Right? Hypnagogia is kind of a state our brain can get in between wakefulness and sleeping that has certain kind of malfunctions, right? And so you can still have a kind of dreamlike state when you're in this, and a lot of people report feeling other presences or stuff like that. But one of the big things that tends to lead a lot to UFO things is sleep paralysis. When you go to sleep, your brain paralyzes you, and that's so that you don't act out your dreams. And sometimes when you don't transition in or out of that state properly, you can still end up paralyzed while you're awake, right? And if you read the list of symptoms for hypnagogia and then go read UFO encounters, you'll be surprised how shockingly similar they are. And most therapists believe that about 70% of all UFO cases are just manifestations of hypnagogia. So it's kind of an interesting way our brain goes wrong. I mentioned we like to study mythical creatures. This is strictly for practical value. So like the top two, it's a safety issue, right? If you don't want your goats getting eaten or something like that, so. And then the middle one, totally for entertainment value, right? Absolutely. And the bottom two, it's money saving, right? If you don't have to do those things, you can save money. So we like to study mythical creatures. Logical fallacies. Let's go back to those bad arguments I brought up before. I know it sounds weird, but, right? This argument has a name. Do you know what the name of this argument is? Shout it out if you know it. Anyone? We don't know how it works, but it's called an appeal to ignorance, okay? We're not sure how this happens, but that's actually not a valid argument. If we're not sure, this may be shocking, if we're not sure how something happens, then you can't draw conclusions about it, okay? So, sorry, we have to either get sure or something else. Okay, what about the other one? Apply cold cabbage compresses for long periods. We got to swap them out every 2 hours, keep them cool. So a lot of things going on there. This argument has a name too. Anybody know what it is? Shout it out.
Causation, not correlation.
That's right, yeah. Confusing association with causation, right? There were about 50 things going on in that person's argument, right? One of them caused them to stop producing milk, most likely not breastfeeding. But, they attributed it to a bunch of other things. And we do this in IT, right? What happens when you call your cable modem company about some cable problem, right? Well, have you restarted the computer? What does that have to do with anything, It's just their list of 18 steps that they're walking through, right? And then the original breastfeeding Nazi who told me the lie in the first place. This argument has a name too. What's this one called? Right, yeah. Argument from authority, right? You can't take an authority's word on things, right? We actually have to have facts to back it up. which means all this stuff I'm telling you up here right now, this is crap, okay? And you cannot take my word for it. So just so you know. And I want to bring up, it's important to remember that skepticism is not cynicism, right? You have the special group of people that believe whatever they're told without questioning it, believers, right? And then you have the opposite of that, the people that reject everything they're told without thought. Those are the cynics, okay? Skepticism is in the middle. We'll accept things, we just want to see some evidence. We want to see it backed up, right? And the important thing is that we're thinking, right? That's the key. Okay, so by now most of you probably think I've lost the plot here. This is a Ruby conference, right? Ruby, red, like that. But the truth is, I think this is actually relevant to what we do, because I actually believe that I'm a better programmer because I'm a skeptic, right? And I think we actually know that. Think about how we do software optimizations, right? What's the first thing we tell you about optimizations? Don't do it, right? Because your superstitions and stuff are going to get in your way, right? You're going to think, oh, this is going to make the computer do 10 extra steps. Well, 10 extra steps in a computer happens really freaking fast, you know, so it may not matter, right? And then when it does actually slow down, we tell you to gather the evidence, make sure that you need to do this, right? And you know what you're doing and stuff. So we are very skeptical about this thing. And we definitely have programming fallacies, right? If you use global variables, your program will turn into a mess of everybody running into everything, right? True or not, this argument has a name. If you do this, then your program will ultimately just devolve into an unmaintainable mess. This argument has a name too. Does anybody know what it is? Hasty generalization, slippery slope, both pretty close. I think I would call this one the argument from final consequences, right? That if you go down this road, then the final consequences of it are something you can't deal with. It's too much. But is that actually true, right? Is it actually true that I have thrown a global variable in a test file before? I needed to globally share some information, and that's what a global variable does, you know? And it worked out okay, and nobody came to my house and took away my keyboard or anything like that. You know, maybe they should have. I don't know. Yeah. Now that I've told you, maybe they will. Look at your shell. What about bash and ZSH? You know, a shell is largely organized around global information. Think about the programming environment, or how in Unix processes pass streams onto their child processes. Shells wouldn't work very well without globally shared information, you know? So I don't think it's always true. What about MongoDB is better than MySQL, all right? It's web scale. That's true. I can't compete with that. It's web scale. Good going. This argument has a name too. Usually when people do this, they're just reading bullet points off the back of the box, right? They're telling you all the good stuff, but they're not telling you the negative side, right? You don't ever get the other side of the story. What's this argument called? Anybody know?
Appeal to buzzwords.
Appeal to buzzwords. I think we are crowning that as a new fallacy. I love that. And yeah, that's pretty much what it's called, the toupee fallacy. Yeah, same thing, right? Same thing. It's toupees, right? Because girls always say they can tell if a guy has a toupee, right? And there's a corollary argument that guys think they can tell if girls have something. I'm not going to say that one because I'm already pushing my luck with the boob slide, right? So I'm not going to say it. Counting hits and ignoring the misses, right? That's when they're paying attention to what works and not paying attention to what doesn't work. This is one of my favorite fallacies in all of programming. We rewrote it in whatever, and now it's stable and fast and blah, 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 right? This is an argument we've already seen before. Which one is it?
Correlation is not like causation.
Yeah, exactly, right? If you write something once and figure out how it works and you understand it better, and then you rewrite it, this may be shocking to some of you, but it's likely to get better, okay? I'm just saying. Doesn't really matter on the language there, right? It might get better. And we know from Turing completenesses that all programming languages are capable of the same things, right? Some of them specialize or make certain things easier, but the truth is we should be able to do something in a different language the same. So that's that. Okay, I told you all this because I kind of want to talk to you about something. We have this thing in the Ruby community where we're very big on testing. It kind of permeates everything we do, and we talk about it a lot, and it's very important to us. And I'm a believer. I believe in testing. I do it. I can prove it. I'm a card-carrying member, okay? But I hear some things about testing that kind of bug me a little bit, like that it's the only way to do things. I threw a library up on GitHub not too long ago, and it was just a wrapper for an external web API, and it didn't have tests yet. It was the first version of it. It's like 0.0.0.1. And immediately, the Twitter people were all over me. Where are the tests? I didn't write it with tests. I was using a web API. And when I do that, I do eventually like to use VCR to record the requests and test it that way. But in the first version, I find it easier to build a web API while interacting with the web API. You know, just fire up an interactive shell and kind of build the methods as I go, and that's easier for me, right? Testing is one way to build good software, but it's not the only way to build good software. That we always do it. Man, if you look at our public image, I would say that Rubyists test 80% of the time or higher, just by the things I see us say. But the truth is, I see a lot of code out there. In my job, I see so many applications, and we are not doing it that much, okay? I promise you. Maybe 40% of the time. It's definitely less than half, okay? So I'm not sure why we say one thing and do another. That's a little strange to me. And that's how the experts do it, right? If you want to be like 37 Signals, you're going to have to test your app like 37 Signals does. Yeah, we've already learned this is the argument from authority, right? And it doesn't really hold any weight. So I'm asking, is this still a positive thing in our community that we're doing here? And I want to ask this question because at Red Dirt, I saw one programmer go up to another one and say, hey, you got to check out this thing I just wrote. It's really cool, and you need to see it. And you would know this programmer's name if I said it. It's an expert in our community. And the second programmer said, oh, yeah, I should look at that. Does it have any tests? And the first programmer said, no, it doesn't. And he launched into his description of why it doesn't have any tests. And you know what? It didn't matter. He had already lost the other guy's attention. And you could tell that he didn't care anymore. So I made it a point to go see what this guy had built. And I had him sit down and show it to me. And I got to tell you, it was one of the coolest pieces of technology I saw at Red Dirt RubyConf. So if we're dividing people based on, if we're segregating based on the practices you do follow and the practices you don't follow, is this still a positive thing in our community? Is this how we want to be, right? And we get to choose what we want to be, right? We should always remember that. Ruby's still a pretty young community, but we're growing up now. We're getting numbers, right? The attendance at Lone Star is on the rise again, right? So we know we're growing up. We get to pick who we want to be. So if you ask me what I want to be, this is my answer. I want us to be a culture that reasons together, okay? This is why I'm here. I'm here to learn from you guys, to work with you guys, to see the things you've done that went well and the things you've done that didn't go so well. That's what I'm in it for, okay? And that's what I think we should aim for. Okay, so that was my best shot at taking like an anecdotal story and relating it to what we do as Rubyists. How'd it go?
Great.
Yeah? Pretty good? Okay, I'm asking because there are other schools of thought. Right? And if Zed was here, he'd just insult everybody and talk about how they're trying to take power and we got to fight back and, you know, things like that. This is what I say to that, right? Right. we are way more interesting to me when we're working together than when we're working against each other. Okay, so that's just not my style, and we're not going to go there. But I do want to talk about what's next. I told you what I think we should do, but it always bugs me when people tell me what they think we should do and don't tell me how we should do it. So I want to talk about how we should do it. But to do that, we got to look at the future, okay? And so we're going to look into the future. And we have lots of keynotes here at Lone Star this year, you may have heard.
What's the future? That's only 20 minutes away.
It's coming up quick, yeah. I better hurry. You done with those slides, Glenn? Yeah, oh, great. You need me to stall for time? Okay, let's check it. Delay the future. So we have some other keynotes here at Lone Star. This is Obi's, and suspiciously it's 5 minutes longer than my keynote, which you may think is an advantage, but keep in mind that the first keynote sets the topic, so Obi didn't really know what we were talking about until just now, and he's got to write a keynote, and it's got to be 5 minutes better than mine, okay? So I don't know, it doesn't sound like much of an advantage. It gets a little worse. Chad gets a full hour, but he's expected to show up with a beard. I'm thinking that's not going to happen, I don't know. I haven't seen Chad in a little while, I guess, but we'll see. Actually, I want to talk about a closer keynote, and I saw from Jim's slides just a few minutes ago that this has actually been changed on the site, but as of just a couple days ago, Glenn's keynote was greatness to be determined. Okay, so I don't really know what Glenn's keynote is about. I don't think a lot of people know what Glenn's keynote is going to be about. But I could guess it might be real software engineering, right? Because Glenn's given that talk in a few places now. And I have good reason to guess something like that. People have said things like this about Glenn's talk, that it's such a fantastic talk that we should have it everywhere. And I agree, it's a great talk. If you haven't seen Glenn's real software engineering talk, he says the problem with the people who've defined software and engineering is that they've misunderstood a couple of things, software and engineering, right? Don't laugh at that, it's my keynote. Come on, people. Okay, but Glenn does say one thing in that talk that I didn't like. And a couple minutes in, he says, I do think software is, in some respects, a science. And he kind of half-heartedly dismisses it, to be honest. And I'll tell you, that had me a little worried. Glenn was misunderstanding a couple of things, like software and science. Okay? But I listened to the rest of the keynote, I went through the whole thing, and I promise you, Glenn Vanderburg understands software and science. And in fact, when he's asking you to do real software engineering, and when I'm asking you to be skeptical, what we're actually saying is more of this, right? And let me go ahead and turn that red for you, because science is worth it, right? Okay, so I know I'm in Texas, and yeah.
Easy there, buddy.
Easy. Yeah, I don't want to say bad things here, but you guys are kind of regularly voting about whether or not you keep science in your textbooks. So, congratulations on the most recent 14-0 vote. I'm very proud of you. Yes, that's right. That's good. So here's a refresher on the scientific method, in case you've forgotten. You got to make some observations, right? You got to observe what's going on. That helps you form a hypothesis. You try to make sure you're right by proving yourself wrong, giving it your best effort to prove yourself wrong. If you still think you're right, then you let others get a whack at proving you wrong. And then, and this is important, we always go forward with our best understanding at the time, right? We go forward with the best knowledge we currently have, okay? Let's dig into those a little bit more. I assume being observant is obvious. I assume I don't even have to defend this. A lot of times I'll be working with someone and we'll be finding a bug or something like that. I'll come up with some key insight and they'll be like, how did you know what to do there? I read the error message. You know, I'm the only one still reading, or something like that. Being observant, you have to be observant in what we do, right? You have to pay attention because there's a lot going on. And if we're not measuring it and tracking it, then we can't keep track of it all. A hypothesis has 2 key criteria. The first one is it has to be falsifiable. You have to be able to prove it wrong. If you can't do that, you may still be right, but you're not doing science, okay? So you have to be able to prove it wrong. The other thing is it needs to make useful predictions about the future. That's why we make hypotheses, so that we can use them to figure out our future and learn new things. And then I said you have to try to prove yourself wrong, not right. You can't prove yourself right? Because even if you throw up your 10 best arguments and then knock them all down, maybe it's the 11th one that proves you wrong, and we just haven't gotten to that one yet, right? An example I love for this is anti-evolution people often throw out the argument of irreducible complexity. And what they're saying is that the human eye is so complicated a structure that it would have had to be formed whole hog, that it wouldn't be useful in pieces, right, as we were evolving along. The interesting part is where this argument comes from. It was put forth by a man named Charles Darwin in a book called The Origin of the Species, where he introduced something called evolution, okay? This was his attempt to prove himself wrong. He was throwing out the best counter arguments he could. And obviously they stop reading at the introduction to that argument because he goes through and shows you why it's not true and how we know that evolution is true. So you have to do that. You have to try to prove yourself wrong. But you're going to be invested in your idea, right? And you're going to care about it more than other people are. So you're going to try to slant things in your favor. You want it to be true, right? Which is why it's important you got to share it with us. We don't love you that much, okay? And we're not afraid to say things about you, okay? So you got to run it by us first. And then finally, I said knowledge is always up for revision, right? And I'm going to show you a great example of this. So in just a second, I'm going to ask people to raise their hands if they believe in the theory of gravity, all right? But again, this is my keynote, and I don't want you guys screwing it up. So if anybody doesn't raise their hand, I'm throwing your laptop off the roof of this building. All right, so who believes in the theory of gravity? Oh my gosh, everybody. Isn't that amazing? I don't even know how that happens. Right, we believe in the theory of gravity because Newton figured it out, right? He put forth the theory of universal gravitation, and he showed us how gravity works, right? Was Newton right? Raise your hand if you think Newton was right. Oh, we've got a lot of qualifications here. And I didn't see a lot of hands shooting up, right? Newton was close, right? And actually, Einstein fixed it in general relativity, right? Yeah. Oh, my God. Right, at what scale? Right. Yeah. Did you hear they have scientifically tested the multiverse? How cool is that? They're trying to prove the multiverse exists. How awesome is that? That is awesome. Yes, I agree. Anyways, sidetrack there, sorry. Theory of gravity, Newton's version of it was just close, right? But close is good. We used close for a while and it worked just fine, okay? Until it didn't work just fine and then we needed better than close, right? So we came up with the better idea. Okay, so if Glenn tells us we need to do real software engineering, I'm telling you we need to do real science, right? And this isn't the stuff that happens in labs. This is the messy stuff that everybody can do, right? And if you think you are not a scientist, you do not have a 1-year-old baby, okay? Have you watched a 1-year-old baby? They are born scientists. I'm serious. They observe everything. They copy everything I do, especially the stuff I don't want them to copy, right? They form hypotheses about things they think they can do that are usually pretty bad ideas, right? And then they try to prove themselves wrong, usually to the effect of black eyes, busted lips, things like that. There's definitely some peer review going on. That's called parenting, okay? And they're going forward with the best knowledge they have at the time. I am serious. Watch a little baby. They are doing science experiments all day, every day, okay? It's amazing. And you got to remember, science is imperfect by definition, right? We're only using the best ideas we have at the time. Maybe BDD is just close as a way to develop good software, and we haven't found the better way yet, right? It's possible. We don't know. This leads us to one of my favorite quotes ever. Science is the best thing humanity has ever come up with it, and if it isn't, science will fix it. Right? Bill Nye, the science guy. It's an iterative process, like we do in software development, because you have to course correct. You have to be able to change things. All right, the great news is I think we are doing science. We really are. I see it all the time. Look at agile development. We have agile development as kind of a collection of theories that helps us make predictions about projects, right? That's why we do it. Testing is how we try to prove code wrong, right? If you have 100% test coverage and it's all green, does that mean your code works? No, it doesn't guarantee anything, right? Maybe you haven't written the test that exposes the bug, right? And we're getting really good at peer review, right? GitHub and blogging, we do that well, peer review. We fork some code, try an idea, right? Oh, that can't be right because of this, right? Or we publish a blog and say, this is the way I did it my last job, and it seemed to work really well. What do you guys think? No, bad idea, dude, because of this, or whatever. We do peer review well. These are some recent things that have kind of inspired me to give this talk. I've seen a lot of things recently that are reminding me of the science in computer science. And Avdi's here. He's got his Virtuous Code blog where he talks about things like the law of Demeter. I think it would be better called the theory of Demeter, but I still buy it. It's something we've learned over using writing code for a long time and how we can do it better. And he writes about that on his blog. He's got the Exceptional Ruby book, which is really just an awesome brain dump of his everything he knows about exception handling. It includes plenty of hypotheses, so pretty cool stuff. Aaron Patterson's recent improvements to Rails, those are amazing, right? Rails is kind of developed just, on the fly by sometimes people who aren't expert programmers. And Aaron's been going back through and turning the cold light of science on Rails and saying that, you know what, this is slow, and it's because it's this one problem, and we have a name for it, and we have a solution. It's called an abstract syntax tree, and I'm going to rewrite it like that. That's very cool stuff. And then Gregory Brown has his Ruby Mendicant University, where he does all kinds of experiments on how we can teach people to program, right? And he's learning a lot with that. He's doing science on the front lines. And his Practicing Ruby essays, if you've read those, they're really great because they're Greg throwing out some of his best ideas, but always in the light of, please comment on this. It may not be right. I want to hear what you think, right? Sharing. And he's going to start those up again this month, so watch for that. All of these people have something in common. They've been on Ruby Rogues podcast more than once. That's because Ruby Rogues is my effort to bring science back to the community. I got together with a couple of guys and I said, hey, let's start talking about these things that we're doing. And instead of just, being a news podcast, let's really talk about these issues and the problems behind them and stuff like that. So I hope you guys like Ruby Rogues and you're listening to it because that's something I'm trying to put together. So more of this, please, right? More science. Let's do more of that. My hope is that we can put the science back in computer science because I think we need that. I think we need to use better processes, and aim for learning more from each other, which is what I want to do. So what should we do with our science? I'm going to throw out a couple of random ideas, but this doesn't have to be what we could do. But here's some things I think we should do. First, I think we should reimagine documentation. And when I say that, I mean throw away where we are and start over, okay? What does it say that universally programmers hate documentation? How long have we been doing this? We can't get that right yet? There's got to be something better, right? RDoc is not the right way, I don't think. I mean, I'm not even sure API documentation is all that valuable. Documentation is kind of a layered thing. And when you're first getting into it, you want tutorials, right? When you're at the intermediate level, you probably are more interested in something like FAQ kind of information, right? Maybe API docs at that point, but only if it's restricted to the 50 most important methods instead of the 500 methods that the library has. And then only when you reach like expert level is something like API documentation useful to you, right? Because you actually have to know what you're going to look for. I've done a lot of testing on this and thinking of different ideas, and I don't have anything that's great enough that I'm ready to put forward yet, but I can tell you that what we're doing is not working. I've released libraries that were fully documented from the time I released them. They've been out for years, and to this day I get emails where I copy and paste from the documentation to answer the email. I mean, it's not working, right? And things like Yard, you know, if RDocs C, then Yard's just C++, right? It's, oh, they don't like that one. I like Yard, I think it's cool, but it's still a step on the wrong path, right? I don't think we're going to the right place. Where's the Ruby of documentation, right? There's got to be a solution that makes more sense than this, that's easier, that is more useful. You know, I think documentation is an area we could still blow wide open. Another trend I'm seeing that I think is really cool is expanded pairing, right? With like Twitter coming up, and sometimes people just hook up and they'll just pair up on a problem and work on it. I think that's really cool. When you think about these systems we build, they're like massive, right? The job I was working on last month is 40,000 lines of code. It's unlikely I'm an expert in all 40,000 of those lines, okay? It's just not likely. Because programmers specialize, right? We focus on different things, and we're better at different things. Some guys are really good at event-driven programming, right? And some people aren't. And then I think there's kind of a business need thing going on here. I mean, most businesses, meaning not living social, use like 2 or 3 programmers to build a project, right? And it's about money and salary and convenience of always using the same 2 or 3 programmers or something like that, right? But it's unlikely that those 2 or 3 programmers are experts in everything that those people need, right? What if we could figure out a way to cross that barrier and share a lot more? What if whenever I have an event-driven programming problem, I could go get an event-driven programming expert and get him to help me solve it? What if we could figure out how to do that? That would be pretty cool. And I'm not saying there's not problems we'd have to solve to do that for, teaching somebody new every single week. My domain model would be very challenging, right? But we do know that programmers can program to a spec, so, it's maybe possible. I don't know. Oh, and if we're going to figure this out, can we please come up with something better than Skype? Seriously? There's got to be a better way to share than that, right? But those are my ideas, just some of my ideas. And your ideas are what really matter, right? I want to use science to figure out your ideas and bring them to our community. But there's one more thing. I told you I studied the great keynotes. Again, this is my keynote, and I don't want you guys screwing it up. So after a lot of these motivational speeches, I'll talk to people in the halls later, and they're like, yeah, I really like what so-and-so says, but I don't know what I can do about it, right? So I'm going to preempt that right now, and I don't want to hear any whining in the hallway, okay? You can help. Do you guys know about the Asch conformity experiments? Raise your hand if you know what these are. Awesome, I'm going to teach you something cool. Okay, on these cards here, in the Asch conformity experiments, they'll put you around a table, and they'll ask you something like, there'll be 4 of you or so, and they'll ask you something like, the line on the left is the same size as A, B, or C, which one? And the other guys around the table, they're actually in on the experiment, okay? And they will purposefully lie. They'll all say A, A, A. And then when it gets around to you, the pressure's mounting, and it turns out that humans 75% of the time will give a wrong answer to at least one question, right? It's the peer pressure. It drives you to do it, okay? But there's variations on this experiment. And if they turn just one guy in your favor, right? If they change just one answer to the right answer, all of a sudden, you'll give the right answer because now you got help, right? That's all it takes. Well, there are 260 of us in this room, right? That means we're 260 better than one guy, okay? We're the people that matter right here, and we can make our community whatever we want it to be, all right? That's all I got. Thank you very much.